Welcome to Midweek, Experiments in Faithfulness. This is a weekly facilitated spiritual practice where we learn and grow with each other in community. My name is Brent, and I am the Program and Engagement Manager here at Beacon Hill Friends House. And we are a Quaker Center for Learning. We are also home to Beacon Hill Friends Meeting, and we are a residential community of about 20 people or so. So we welcome you to our program tonight. Tonight, Susan Loucks will be presenting "You're Not in Traffic, You Are Traffic," which I've absolutely loved that title. Quaker meetings are ideally places where power is shared broadly. However, we show up with assumptions and conditioning from other kinds of power structure. If power is like water, what are ways that we can all get enough to drink without organizational floods and droughts? Is our use of power a spiritual discipline, individually and collectively? So tonight we will have a powerful evening of exploration. I'm excited to introduce you to Susan. Susan is a nonprofit consultant working with organizations that are interested in creating as good a world inside their walls as they are striving to build on the outside. She designs and facilitates processes for change, planning, skill building, and organizational improvement with particular attention to broad and effective participation and power dynamics within organizations. One of the best jobs of her life was clerking Beacon Hill Friends Meeting. And she has also served as clerk for Pittsburgh Friends Meeting and Lake Erie yearly meeting as well. Susan, it is all yours.
Thank you, Brent. So we only have an hour and there's lots of awesome material that I'd love to talk about. But I wanted to let you know that it's hard to kind of get to what do we then do until we've understood the parameters. So I wanted to let you know that this hour, I'm going to be spending a chunk of time helping us understand the parameters. And if you're left wishing, but I want to know what to do about it, you're going to have to come back for my 4-hour session and the virtual gathering in February, or some other, invite me to talk because I want to talk more about this sort of stuff. So just to let you know, we're going to be sort of exploring a lot and not kind of coming up with necessarily a lot of solutions in this hour, but it should give you food for thought nevertheless. So let's start with some, just to understand about what power is. We don't even like to use the word power. So the first thing I want to do is sort of normalize the word power. And the definition that we can be talking about is ability to produce an effect, or ability to have control or influence over others. The metaphor of power like water, I think, is a really nice one. And there was some place I read it that I don't remember, but I looked it up again. And there is a gentleman who has a TED Talk about power. His name is Eric Liu. And he also uses this metaphor of water for power. And it's a neutral thing, right? Power is neutral and it flows. It's often flowing. But we can think about how policy then would be sort of like ice. It's a frozen power, right? We've created a structure, a solid structure with the power. Or we can think about power sort of being water vapor it's in the atmosphere and it's shaping the climate, but it's a little hard to see. We can also think about the fact that distributing power takes effort. Like power tends to accumulate just like water in certain places. And so if we want to have a distributed system, we need to put in irrigation pipes, right? Like we need to be taking active steps to distribute the water. And another thing that I want to start us off with about thinking about power is that generally when we think of power, our minds go automatically to kind of control, coercive power, which is definitely a way that power shows up in the world. But there are many, many ways that we can understand power, and I want us to be inclusive of this in our mind. I'm not going to go through all the different ways that we think of power because I don't have time tonight, but some of them that I'll mention is explicit power. So that's like positional power. We give the clerk the power to set the agenda and manage pacing and meeting for business. It's authority that comes with that role. That's explicit power. When that person is no longer clerk, they don't get to do that anymore, right? It's a part of their role. Also, power can come with expertise. So if you have the website manager and your web goes down, that person, you recognize how much power that has, what that position has. So knowing how to do things or knowing how to get the boiler working again, that's a certain kind of power that is in the house. And then again, I won't go into this in great detail, but it's definitely true that there's a lot of other ways that we listen to people or give people power based on rank, social rank, and the way that social rank is conferred. And I love getting details about what conveys social rank in different settings. And actually, I'm delighted that Cornelia is here because Cornelia, I remember at one point we were talking about this. I think you and I were in a workshop together and this question was asked, and you said that you got social rank because your kids grew up to be Quakers, and that was status in Quaker world. So there's all sorts of like places where you can get status, and that's a particularly Quaker one. If your kids grew up when they were still Quaker, it means you did some kind of job as a parent. So another one for us would be like, if you've gone to prison for civil disobedience, I think there's a way that people listen to you in Quaker settings or give you some sort of rank, which is different from people who haven't done that. So that's just kind of setting the stage with what we're talking about when we talk about power. We have inherited structures in our Quaker meetings that are supportive of an alternative approach to power. This is me speaking now, but we engage with these structures in the way that we engage in the world. So what happens when a bunch of people who have a particular orientation about power come together in an organization, right? So we have trends that we have and what happens when we get together. Here's a couple trends I will name for you. So one trend is that people in Quaker settings feel that power is something to be fought against, right? They come in not liking power very much, and they are oriented towards sort of fighting power. And that can be directed inside the organization as well as outside the organization. It's just sort of their practice in how they orient towards power. And we can feel sometimes like they need to really stand up for the oppressed, however the oppressed are in this situation. But there's a statement in this pamphlet that I was referring to. I learned that this Speak Truth to Power came out of an AFSC pamphlet in I think the 1960s or something. And it's speaking truth to power has been a statement that is with us for a long time. But when we're talking about speaking truth to power, there's like truth on one side and power on the other. And it feels like you can either choose truth or you can choose power. So which side are you on, right? And it makes it very difficult for us to relate to power constructively. So one example I would give of a way this could show up is that the clerk, who again has positional power to set the agenda, someone requested or a group requested to have something on the agenda. The clerk felt it wasn't seasoned and left it off, and that was construed as sort of oppressive power, and there was a coalition built to come in for meeting for business and make sure that that got addressed. This actually happened to me. But the interesting thing there is, I mean, of course, there are many nuances to this story, but the thing that I want to sort of draw out is it became a truth against power dynamic as opposed to kind of a problem-solving dynamic, that's an orientation towards power that can happen. Another way that this can happen is we are not comfortable with power, so we will stand in the way of power being exercised. We will protect us from impacts of power. We don't like power in the world, so we refuse to have power. So that often shows up as an unwillingness to do something. So let's say someone has an idea to try some new experiment or make an improvement, and it feels scary because it involves exercising power in the meeting or in the world. And so that can feel like something that people need to protect against. So that's another way that this can happen. The author of that pamphlet tells a really interesting story about reading in a college class the book Walden, and the students in his class were irate about the way that the college was influencing power over them, or they were incensed, I guess. So he threw the book of Walden into the middle of the room and said, okay, let's pretend that this book is power. And whoever goes and gets it has the control to do what they want to do in this institution. And everybody just kind of sat there for a while. They were a little bit cowed by this idea that you could just go up and take power. And then somebody started to move. It was a guy who had used to be in the Navy, but he has become a pacifist, is what the pamphlet author said. He sort of started to move towards the book, and someone else immediately got up and stepped on the book in the middle of the room, right? This was such a good example to me of how we're like, don't use power. My intention is that no one uses power here, right? Just a really interesting way for us to be oriented towards power. Another way that this can happen in our meetings is that people give up their own power in service to the body. So they are disregarding their own needs, and this can show up as somebody who takes on a lot of duties. This is not the only way it can show up, but someone who takes on a lot of tasks, feels increasingly oppressed by those tasks, is frustrated that no one else is helping them, and becomes resentful. But what the thing that they're not doing is sort of looking after themselves in that moment, right? And this is a way that it can show up, because they're taking on a burden instead of being in their own power. And all of these are things that we do. I don't want to point the finger at anybody. These are just ways that it can show up. We all may rotate through these spaces. Another way that it can come up is that, like, look, here we are Quakers, we are about peace, we are about harmony. So like this kind of struggle around power is super not comfortable for us. And like, let's say there's something on the agenda that is really might be a little bit contentious. I'm going to stay home. I don't want to be there. I don't want to fight this battle. So to withdraw is another way, like just be conflict avoidant, right? We all know, I think, that Quakers can be pretty conflict avoidant. So this is a way that particularly in Quaker settings, we can see power dynamics come up because of who we attract and who we are and who we want to be. So we all do all of these things. This is not a gotcha. We are human. We need to recognize that these are things that happen in us as people. This is sort of the spiritual work side. This is where I start to go into the midweek spiritual practice stuff. So part of our work as individuals is to recognize what archetypes are familiar to us and what we go into maybe in times of stress. We go into all of these. They're not values. There's not a one that's always best to be in. So, and there are gifts that come with each of these. So for example, the victim, the gifts of being in the victim archetype are surrender and humility. But it also can mean that it has these other characteristics. You feel helpless, you feel martyred. You can even be a manipulator where you sort of deprioritize your needs and then blame others for not meeting your needs, right? So without being direct around it. So that's one danger of being in the victim space, but it has some gifts with it too, right? The warrior, let's talk about gifts of the warrior. So one gift is confidence in action, right? That's something we often want. But it can be still locked in, just like the victim, it's locked into a response with other people, right? Doesn't have this kind of personal presence. This bystander one, it's just kind of matching that turtle place. The gifts of that are care of self, like boundaries. We all need to be in a turtle space at some point. But often this person is allowing the dominant force to prevail, and that may not be the best situation for the group. The gifts of the leader are creativity and vision, but they can be out of touch with people who are in other states or over-identified with using their power. And then the creator is more of a flow space, so it's not as easy to get stuck in the creator space. So some of these, as you can imagine, if you tend to be in these archetypes, some of these archetypes correspond more with personal satisfaction and resilience. and clarity more than others. So our idea is not to get stuck too much in any of these archetypes. Which of these archetypes is an archetype you recognize that you are going into yourself?